I know what you're thinking right now. What if you got trapped in an extra-dimensional world filled with your worst nightmares? Even worse, what if you being stuck there unleashed absolute horror on the real world? Okay, maybe that's not exactly what you were thinking, but it's definitely something that passed through the mind of a screenwriter, and that's why you'll be joining me today as I dive into the ghoulish story of Creepy Eddie. Creepy Eddie never had a proper origin story, but he made his debut in the 6th season's episode titled Nightmare in the Lair. That story kicked off with Leo, Mikey, and Raph watching a monster movie called The Squid Monster That Ate Hoboken. But their entertainment got cut short when Donnie's experiment blew yet another fuse at the Lair. Terrified at the idea of spending a night without TV, Splinter suggested that the turtles use their imagination. Meanwhile, at Channel 6, the gang welcomed a new member, Milton Frobisher III, who happened to be the son of Channel 6's owner, Milton Frobisher II.
Gosh, what an incredible coincidence.
This whole plot is a mini-episode of its own. We'll come back to it later. Back at the Lair, and having finally fixed his new invention, Donatello unveiled the Dreamovision to his brothers. This machine could give its user the ability to create life-sized holograms, powered by their own imagination. Donnie, Leo, and Raph started testing the device's wireless helmet. In one of these adventures, they were attacked by pirates, which wasn't a part of Raph's fantasy. A spear hit the helmet, causing it to malfunction and become stranded. That was when Creepy Eddie revealed his existence to the turtles, claiming that they were now under his control. Forcing the helmet, Donnie managed to put an end to Raph's fantasy. This immediately returned them to the Lair, but to their surprise, they found the spear they had been attacked with in the dream. The consequences of Donnie's invention were clearly dangerous, so he decided to store the helmet away from reach until he could figure out what went wrong. This was a bummer for Mikey, who was the only turtle who didn't get to materialize his dreams. Jealous, he waited until his brothers went out to return some videotapes so he could use it. Mikey used the helmet to imagine himself surfing at some sunny destination, but his fantasy took a dark turn when the squid monster that ate Hoboken emerged from the waters to attack him. Mikey managed to escape to the beach, but after getting out of the water, he realized that the helmet couldn't work when wet. He was later attacked by a giant tidal wave that happened to look like Creepy Eddie. Mikey waited for the helmet to dry before trying his luck again. This time, he imagined himself as a hockey player, but his joy couldn't last. The ice turned into water, and he ended up swimming under the ice rink until he re-emerged inside an underground cavern. There, he finally confronted Creepy Eddie. It turned out that Eddie was waiting for someone from Mikey's dimension to pass through his realm, Nightmare Land. With Mikey trapped there, all he needed was another visitor from the same world, so that he could make a 2-for-1 exchange. The two visitors would end up stranded in Nightmare Land, freeing Creepy Eddie to terrorize the real world. That second visitor ended up being Leonardo, who, worried by Mikey's disappearance, got sucked into a whirlwind at the Lair. This was all that Eddie needed to cross into our dimension. His first victim was Master Splinter, who was threatened by a giant cat. Fortunately, Raph and Donnie returned to the Lair just in time to save their sensei. Back at Channel 6, Vernon and Irma tried their best to look good in front of Milton, but it didn't quite work out as planned, as the poor guy ended up being sent to the emergency room. Interestingly, this was just the thing Milton needed to realize that he wanted to be a doctor. As a reward, Milton II rewarded April and Irma with a 2-week vacation to Hawaii. After that plot was finished, April wanted to tell Leonardo about it, but after getting an ominous recorded message from him, she decided to go back to the Lair and investigate. Donnie and Raph realized that the key to sending Eddie back to his dimension was to unplug the generator. Unfortunately, as they tried to run to it, the floor turned into a flytrap, leaving Donnie just a few meters short of victory. Knowing that he could be sent back to his dimension at any moment, Eddie planted a time bomb on the generator. By his logic, destroying the generator would make the exchange permanent. I'm not sure how that would differ from unplugging it, but let's just go with it. It was then that April arrived at the lair, and when she switched the lights on, a fuse blew up, turning the generator off. This returned Leo and Mikey into our world, and as Eddie was getting sucked back into Nightmare Land, Donnie sent the time bomb with him, exploding at the destination. With the crisis over, Mikey, who had survived being chased by monsters from all the horror and sci-fi movies he had ever watched, decided to switch to documentaries. Unfortunately, after seeing a sea creature that looked a little bit too much like Eddie, he bolted out of the lair in a panic. That was the only appearance of Eddie on the show, but the Fred Wolf cartoon received an extension thanks to the Saturday Morning Adventures book. There, it was revealed that saying his name 3 times during Halloween allowed him to cross to our world and have some fun. Which is something the Turtles accidentally triggered, and ended up being sent to Nightmare Land. Eddie started bombing the Turtles with bad jokes and puns, which immediately brought the attention of Phil, Nightmare Land's lawyer. Apparently, Eddie wasn't allowed to make too many puns or bad jokes because the Nightmare King hated them. Make a mental note of this. Eddie sent them on the Yellow Brick Road, which is in the public domain, with a challenge. If they reached the end of the road before midnight, they'd get sent home. Otherwise, they'd be trapped there forever. It was then that Phil had to remind Eddie to keep his maniacal laughter within 1.5 seconds, and that he wasn't allowed to hurt the Turtles before midnight. Among the obstacles the Turtles faced was the ghost of Shibano Sama, who was once the founder of the Foot Clan, until the show retconned it. Then, while fighting against some monsters, the Turtles realized they could use lucid dreaming to their advantage and defy the laws of physics. The Turtles used their intelligence to reach the end of the road before midnight. But Eddie refused to play fair, claiming it had to be midnight somewhere, and got ready to use a trident made of knives. Donatello noticed Eddie couldn't speak for more than a few sentences without making a pun, so he baited him into talking just long enough for Phil to return and punish Eddie for breaking the rules. He later returned the Turtles home. But this wouldn't be the end for this character. When Mr. Ogg later planned his revenge against the Turtles, he wanted them to fight alternate versions of themselves. Knowing the Turtles would likely team up, he enlisted Creepy Eddie to create realistic evil versions instead. By the time the Turtles realized this was Eddie's doing, the villain couldn't help but reveal himself, seeking revenge against the Turtles. This, of course, went against Mr. Ogg's plans, so he trapped Eddie inside a jar. And that was the last time we saw the character. Given his potential, and the fact that NECA just gave him an action figure, it's safe to assume we haven't seen the last of him. For the cartoon, Eddie was voiced by Kevin Schoen, who also voiced Murdude, among other characters. He was created by Dennis O'Flaherty, clearly inspired by the Freddy Krueger character of A Nightmare on Elm Street. We can also assume that he was designed by Frank Rocco, the character designer at the time. There are many things to discuss about this character, and in particular, his first appearance. It's clear to me that there wasn't enough plot to keep the episode running for 20-something minutes, so the Milton plot was added just to pad it up. The plot isn't really complementary to the main story, but I have to admit, it was very entertaining. Overall, the episode was meant to be a parody of the Nightmare movies, which shared a house with the Turtles at New Line Cinema. And this was a pretty accurate parody as well. It's clear that O'Flaherty was a fan of the franchise, or at the very least, knew about the lore. One of the dream mechanics from the movies made it into this episode, when the spear from the dream crossed into the real world. This detail was present in the Nightmare movies since 1984. Another curious similarity was that he was sent back home with a bomb. This seems to be a nod to the way Freddy Krueger died in the 6th installment, which hit theaters in 1991, probably around the time this episode was written. The dream sequences also felt very much inspired by the movies. If you've never watched A Nightmare on Elm Street, those scenes are what make the series stand out. They're surreal and relatable, Because who hasn't had a dream where running felt impossible? Or is it just me? In any case, Eddie didn't have a proper origin and was introduced simply as an extra-dimensional being. But given the source material, one can make assumptions. In the movies, Freddy was granted multiple lives by dream demons. All he had to do in return was spread fear and keep killing, actions that helped the demons weaken the barrier between dreams and reality. That bit of lore was introduced in 1991, just a year before Nightmare in the Lair aired. When Eddie returned in the pages of the Saturday Morning Adventures, it was implied that there was some sort of hierarchy in Nightmare Land as well, so perhaps we will get to meet that Nightmare King someday. As for Phil, the lawyer, the whole story takes on a different meaning once you learn how that came to be. The writer of the book, Erik Burnham, was instructed to ensure that Eddie didn't resemble or sound too much like Freddy Krueger, which was a challenge. This is why Phil kept intervening throughout the adventure, and even disclaimed that they were rightfully using the Yellow Brick Road. As a longtime fan of both franchises, I didn't really need a parody of Freddy in Tmnt, but I kind of like what they did with it. And A Nightmare in the Lair is a great episode, mainly because of the workplace comedy of the Channel 6 subplot. As a fun fact, the actor who played Freddy, Robert Englund, would end up joining the TMNT franchise during the 2012 cartoon as half of the Dream Beavers, along with John Kasser from Tales from the Crypt. But that's a story for another video. What's your take on Creepy Eddie? Did you like his one appearance on the show? Are you reading the comics? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.